So welcome to the latest episode of the Growth Ripples podcast. Today it's my pleasure to be joined by Brett Turley, who's coming from us all the way from sunny Wollongong. Brett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
And first of all, again, always impressed by the mo. We haven't had anyone with a mo on the podcast yet, so you're the first and hopefully not the last.
Well, it's a polarizing feature. It starts conversations because I've never met anyone who's in the middle of between loving and hating mows. You either love it or hate it.
Well, as long as your son and your wife enjoy the mow, I think that's all that counts, right?
Well, yeah, I think I'm just at the stage of my life where I'm not really too fussed on what others think about my personal appearance.
Yeah, nice, fair enough. And Brett, really glad that you've come on the podcast for a few reasons. And now we are going to talk a bit about your exciting business venture. But before we do, I'd really love to hear a bit about your career. And in particular, as I understand it, you started out in the Army and you're a bit of an explosive expert working in the dogs division. I'd love to hear a bit more about that and maybe transition that into what you're doing off the back of your stint, first of all, in the Army.
Yeah, probably some of your listeners right now be like, what has this got to do with HR and some of the stuff you usually talk about? But I spent the first part of my career from 17 for the first decade using a dog to find bombs.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah, well, I did find a couple too, the bad way, but we used to use dogs to find buried mines and explosives in Afghanistan, and we used to work with high-risk search teams to obviously help mitigate threats. I finished that career in special operations around 2013, and that's where I really sort of developed my interest in high-performance environments, but I also found myself in my first incident of burnout. So this transitions then when I went to become a small business owner, burnt out of that, and that's ironically was a health and fitness business. Transitioned to recruiter, went over to HR product management because of my skills in small business and leading teams. Burnt out of that career, started a corporate wellness startup to try and solve the problem around burnout. Realized corporate wellness products receive a really low ROI from building one myself and looking at the market. And then that transitioned into what is today being bit.leave, where we went back into the customer discovery process and realized there's this beautiful double-sided problem around the way people use their leave and their burnout risk and huge leave liabilities on a balance sheet.
Yeah, wow. That's quite an arc, from detecting bombs and saving lives in Afghanistan to now trying to help businesses save their balance sheet, their well-being and their leave. That's quite an arc. And we've had a few chats over, I guess we've known each other for about 8 months or so. And firstly through LinkedIn, which is a great way to kind of network. What drew you, you talked a bit about the well-being piece, but in particular, what was it about solving the leave issue? What was about that for you that you wanted to get your hands around it?
The reason why leave stood out after I'd tested all of these things. So let's start about the skills I acquired that probably make this relatable in some sense. Through dealing with threat pitches and complex environments, I developed a skill called associative thinking, meaning I can take large amounts of data from disparate sources and form plans and see things that people sometimes can't. Hence why I've got all my fingers and toes when I was looking for bombs. And then working as a small business owner, dealing with that around the liabilities and people side, and then also in the health and wellness piece, and then now in technology where I've transitioned later into my career, it's created this full picture of the problem. And I mentioned the ROI on corporate wellness products. When we dug back into the research phase and spoke to more customers, we realized it was kind of obvious now that I look back on it, but it was the epiphany realizing that leave is like one of the oldest benefits we have and everyone's entitled to it, meaning you can impact a large amount of your employee population by focusing on what you have and what you have to have because regulated.
Absolutely. And, as you know, I've been in HR for many years and was head of HR for a while and have certainly talked to lots of managers and companies about the challenges of leave. And well-being is obviously a very hot topic at the moment, both locally and globally. What are you seeing in this leave space at the moment in terms of some of the most progressive companies around, taking care of leave and taking care of people?
So obviously the 4-day work week is trending at the moment. I think there's been some really good bodies of research coming around how it does enable more productive employees, but that's not applicable for every workspace like manufacturing or 24/7 operations where you can't simply just cut your workforce overnight. And then looking at sort of things that have become popular but now are also causing issues is like the explosion of ancillary leave types, where you've got 8 or 9 different types of leave you can tap into. But now companies are being faced with a huge leave liabilities issue on the balance sheet because employees are actually using those types of leave instead of the annual leave they have to use by entitlement. And probably another one that I'm seeing on the fringe that I'm yet to fully quantify, but I know it's a problem, is quantifying leave theft, and then also on the flip side, abuse of unpaid overtime. So wage theft, that's pretty hot at the moment. In relation to leave, doing extra overtime and not receiving any time off for it, like toil, time and lieu. And then also on the flip side, remote environments. Now employees being able to duck out for an hour or two and not actually record that as leave. I think that's a bubbling problem that we are yet to really see the full impact of.
So when you say leave theft, you're talking about where employees are actually taking advantage of their employers. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of like this yin and yang fight that we have with employers, and that's why we sort of exist, to create better transparency and better outcomes for both parties. Because if you're doing excess overtime, you're going to be more inclined to just take a day or take half a day when no one's looking. Right. Because you feel like you're not receiving value from the employer. And then if that employer thinks that you're slacking off, that also has a downstream consequence as well. So that's where we're seeing the struggle. And off the back of COVID, with everyone having their control taken away from them, they're looking for avenues to gain that control back within the employee landscape.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I was just reflecting as you were talking, previous boss that I had, and because of all the bureaucracy and the red tape around giving time in lieu, and I'm sure this happens in a lot of companies, my boss said to me one day when I'd been working quite a few hours overtime, "Oh, just don't put it in the system, just take the day off and just don't tell anyone." And because that was a more effective way to make sure that she rewarded me for the time off, but without getting in trouble from her superiors. Do you see that a lot happening in other companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's talking about the both sides of the fence, right? And keeping it off balance, not necessarily balance sheet, because time and lieu doesn't sit there, but keeping it out of HRIS and keep it out of tracking systems. What we're going to see a problem with, though, which is another trending thing we're seeing come down in legislation, is ISO 45003 compliance, meaning psychosocial safety at work. And underwork and overwork are two primary drivers of that. So if people want to go for that global accreditation, we're also seeing it come down through safe work and other legislation now. You're going to actually have to have tools to factor this, validate it, and prove that you're not taking advantage either side of the fence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really good point that you're sharing it on both sides of the fence, or the coin, so to speak, because a lot of people talk about the overwork problem, and without a doubt, that can be a huge issue, both for mental and physical health. But also, underwork can lead to other stresses as well. So making sure your companies are getting that balance right. Talking about balance, there's a lot of stakeholders in the sort of the sphere of leave, whether it's HR, often trying to encourage people to take leave to get their well-being under control, or at least, they're getting the rest and recharge that they need. On the flip side, often it's finance teams that might be looking to get down those liabilities on the balance sheet that you talked about. What kind of challenges do you see there, and how do you suggest that companies kind of approach and deal with that?
Yeah, it's this really weird grey area. Leave sits in that grey area between, it's a finance problem usually, it's managed by HR, it's managers are undertrained and unable to forecast it within their operational scope, and it's too late by the time they realise they have a problem. And then employees have complete control over it based on legislations and how they can use it based on ancillary leave types and all those sorts of other factors. So first step is creating visibility, bringing the data together in a way that everyone can see it, and then the remediation can occur. So if you look at finance wanting to get liabilities down, HR wanting to improve well-being, The result is people taking their leave. But that could be in a way that provides autonomy to the employee, meaning we're discovering that there's user personas and some people are suitable for a 4-day work week.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are suitable for a 5-day, and all of those sorts of things then become possible because based on your life stage, goal, salary, seniority, and all these other markers that we can pull out of payroll, you're going to suit a certain type of work, which is going to solve those under and overwork problems if you can get on your ideal routine based on where you are in life now and what your goals are in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the way that you dovetail those outcomes. Like at the end of the day, finance and HR, they're wanting the same outcome for leave balances to come down to support staff. And, or I guess their focus might be a bit different, but the outcome is the same. So helping organizations do that is no doubt very powerful. The other thing that I'm seeing, and I'm curious if you're seeing this as well with clients, Brett, is, more clients looking at, or more companies and organizations looking at the option of rewarding people with leave that doesn't go on the balance sheet, but is a way to reward them. So you're not adding to the cost to the business per se, but you're giving people time off as a reward. Like, are you seeing more of a trend of that, particularly in Australia?
Yeah, I think I think with the ancillary leave type we talked about, that all sits off balance sheet. What I'm seeing though, and what I'm hearing from employees and people that actually sometimes get to use these schemes, it's used as a marketing tool for talent attraction. But when it comes to actually realizing it and utilizing it, it's not done as well. The utilization still sometimes falls by the wayside due to operational risk constraints. People actually building these ancillary leave types and realizing, oh, wait, we can't really enable someone to be off the business for X amount of time. And then also we're seeing the increase in legislative leave types like family and domestic violence, and all those various ones that have come out. So we've kind of tied ourselves up in this knot sometimes, but we are definitely seeing the trend of leave because it can be a currency if you cash it out, but it can also be time off. So we talk about finance and HR meeting goals, and depending on your employee persona, you might be suitable for a cash out or you might be mostly suitable for time off. It's definitely a lever. Instead of using a corporate wellness product like I've built that had less than a 10% adoption rate and has minimal to no ROI unless you're actually interested in that thing that you're doing.
Yes.
You can use a universally applicable reward system that you can then see what the uptake is and measure it accurately.
Yeah.
And against the improvement of the climate of the company too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly music to my ears, and putting back my HR hat when I was head of HR, like I would often think about all the various benefits, and my last employer provided amazing benefits. But the thing was that I often spoke to individuals about, it'd be great if you wanted to go to the gym because you might get a Fitness First membership. But if that wasn't your thing, then you're probably going to discount the value of that benefit. But by giving people what they actually want, what they value, the payoff of that benefit can be in multiples compared to the actual cost or the investment for the employer. So really thinking about what is it that employees want, whether it's time off, whether it's a payout of some sort of leave or whatever, can be very powerful for getting, particularly in tough times when inflation's going up, cost of living is going up, giving people the optionality to best suit their circumstances can be very powerful in terms of both the attraction and the retention. And the other thing, before I think you're about to say something there, Brett, the other thing that you just touched on just then that I'd love to revisit and maybe unpack a little bit further is that popularity, particularly a few years ago, around doing unlimited leave. And I've heard a lot of this, particularly in the States, and I think a few Australian companies tried to follow. But like you touched on, the biggest problem I saw, and I've seen in a lot of companies when they've adopted this, is it's led to this behavior and culture of no one actually taking it. So it looks great on paper. Oh yeah, unlimited leave, take it whenever you want. But if the culture is we work 24/7, we work 7 days a week or 5, whatever it is, and I don't have the resources, then it just sits there and no one actually takes it.
Yeah, so let's loop back on some statistics. 84% of your staff either want more time off or more money to deal with cost of living pressures. And the three inside that group is more leave, more higher salaries, obviously, or more money in the bank. So that may come from leave cash out for excess leave, or flexible working arrangements based on their life stage. If you double down on those three things and try to work out a model how that suits your company, I think you'll get a better uplift than trying to employ a gym membership that only appeals to people like me, who's trained for nearly their whole entire life, that enjoys health and fitness. But a single mum of 2 kids, her idea of wellness might be paying for dinner for her family at the end of the week because she's absolutely knackered. She's a go-getter. She's a weapon at work, but she just wants to have some time off at home. And that's what we're talking about, that universal nature. Now, unlimited leave, on the flip side, we talk about more time off, more money. It was originally created in the US to remove the balance sheet liability take the liability off the balance sheet.
Right.
By saying we have unlimited leave, you don't have to track it.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So then also the cultures that they do it, a lot of banking, finance, professional services, it's you slave away for 10 years to become partner. That's if you make it, blah, 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 blah. So it is so pretty well backed in a lot of research now that people actually take less because it's usually adopted in high performance cultures that have a tendency to overwork their staff.
Yeah.
I have seen some great companies here in Australia that do it and let their employees go into negative, though, and they're a high-performance culture but actually force recovery when your performance dips or you need a break. I have seen it done well, but that's usually from some very smart business owners, and I'll give Adrian, one of our first clients, a shout-out for that. Super innovative, but it's made it apply to him, and his staff love it.
And I imagine that, again, that comes back to he's created, Adrian in this case, the culture where people are given the permission and the encouragement to actually take it. Because like we talked about before, you can have all the benefits or all the leave that people want. But if people are discouraged or punished in some way, whether even it's just psychologically punished, then it's going to rely on, or it's going to lead to a lot of people not actually taking the leave and having the recharge that they need.
Yeah, there's another example I can give. I can't mention names, obviously, but there was a professional service company in the accounting industry that has run this process for like 10 to 15 years. They have a minimum standard for their accountant professionals, so a minimum billable hours. But if they do that in 3 days a week, they don't have to come in for the other 2. If they do it over 4 days worth of work, they don't have to come in for the 1. Or if they just want to do the bare minimum and do it over 5 days and hit those hours, there's no recourse. They then also have a bonus scheme based on people that take on extra work and want to climb the ladder. So you've got a base standard that creates psychological safety or whatever that word, like what we want to call it. But it really helps the culture and allows people to stay there, learn their craft, commit to what's achievable in their own life stage. And then if they do want to go up to the next level, there's that pathway that's clearly defined with KPIs, metrics, and the outputs there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. I'd imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's probably more of a private company, maybe even a partnership type model. Is that sort of the arrangement that company had? Or?
Yeah, I believe it is a private company. So obviously that would have something to do with it. But the fact it's been in existence for 10 to 15 years and one of their original senior executives came up with the model and it's stayed and they're a market leader in their field. I think there could be a lot of lessons learned from them particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it really resonates around making sure going beyond just a policy and a statement. And it's about, again, that culture that leaders are creating around these benefits, around leave and that encouragement to take it, because no one's going to take it unless they've got that encouragement and the backing of senior leadership.
Yeah, and then that's probably where we get stuck in the senior leadership realm too much. Strategy's awesome. Execution is better.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the sexiest strategy, but if you can execute your strategy, you're far more likely to get to where you need to go.
Yeah.
So not overcomplicating things. And that's where people get really surprised when I talk to them about it. They're like, well, this seems too simple to be true. We're like, well, it's not, because your employees actually all have this asset we can use and mobilize. We can train your managers to factor it. And it's not an overly complex thing where you don't have to go digging through the SharePoint or digging through wherever the app was to download the discount to go get your Woolies voucher to go do this and that.
Yeah.
It's just leave, HRIS, you get an email from us, tells you to take leave, and your manager goes, hey, you should look at taking some leave, takes leave, happy employee, go on with your day.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something I was keen to revisit that you said earlier about, some of the differences in other countries, and you touched on the US. I mean, a lot of my clients are globally based, and sometimes they're trying to look at how do they consolidate and get some consistency around leave. What's your philosophy around this, or what do you see clients doing really well in this space around benefits and leave when it's more of a global style company?
Yeah, really good question. I've got some things we want to do as a company, which I think would help leverage that. But you are right, there are different leave rules per country. In the US, it's state by state, so it gets inherently very complex. And even in Australia, there's 3,622 modern awards and enterprise agreements in existence.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing for global companies that are ahead of most, so I know a bookkeeping company here in Australia that has a large Filipino workforce. Mm-hmm. They give them the same leave and entitlements as here in Australia.
Right, and I imagine that's much more generous than what they would get in the Philippines otherwise?
We are probably the most generous compared to I don't think I've found anyone more generous than Australia is yet. I'm probably wrong. Don't quote me on it. Someone will probably get in the comments, go, this country has it. Thank you very much. That will actually help me. Yeah. But we are super generous. We have heaps of controls around making this available to employees. So I think if you're an Australian-based organisation and you want to go globally, I think trying to build that benefits plan to factor that. Obviously, your insurance for companies that don't have such a great healthcare system like Australia, that's obviously something, and a lot of the employee record platforms are doing that now. But what I'll see, I'm going to tip this, is what I'll see if people are trying to combine global distribution with like a strong culture, or globally distributed workforce with a strong culture. They'll put everyone on the same REM and benefits package that has that way to bring people together where they don't feel like they're getting shortchanged.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm just looking at the time, Brett. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and hopefully, we can have you on the podcast again. I'm really looking forward to following how bit.leave develops in terms of the offering for clients, and wish you all the best. So, thank you so much, Brett, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, mate. I'm probably talking about one of the most boring business topics in the world, but I enjoy it.
You do it in a very engaging way. I mean, I love the stats, I love the stories, and in particular hearing a bit about your background. So again, thanks, Brett. See you next time.
Thanks, mate.